Well, this is the third time recording this damn video. Alright, so this is my 2015 staples. Most of these cards I'm currently using in 2014, and I will still be more likely using them in 2015, along with some other ones that I potentially start using in 2015, depending on how the state of the game, depending on how the game changes. These cards might change. But for now, this is my 2015 staples. Cards that I typically use in my main decks. As you can see, these are cards that I swap in and out of different deck profiles. My extra deck, my standard cards that I use. And in here in the side deck slots are just cards that I might consider using, like Magic Planner I might consider using, shadow-imprisoning Mirror I might consider using, as main deck cards, and Double Cyclone, potentially replacing MST. It depends. We'll see what happens. And some cards that I, swap in and out based off of certain conditions. So Signal Red. It's a hand. Signal Red and Battle Fader are hand traps. I'll continue with all this fucking disruptions. Alright, so hand traps, typically these replace red screen and decks in which I don't want to use traps or can't use traps, and so I put these in the slot in which red screen would be in. A lot of times, of course, I use these cards in combination with red screen and with each other, so sometimes you might see all three of these cards in the same deck, to maximize my defense. Signal Red is good for protecting your monsters, so he'll take the attack instead of your Light Swarm monster or whatever monster you have on the field that you would like to stay on the field. You can use Signal Red to protect the monster. Signal Red will take the hit for you. Signal Red's effect, where he special summons and redirects the attack to himself, that is a condition of his summoning, so your opponent has to attack him even if skill drain is on the field, because that's not an effect, that's a condition. But his whole, he can't be destroyed by battle for that one battle. That part is an effect, and that will be negated. Battle Fader, special summon him when you get attacked directly. The ending the battle phase is a condition of his summoning, not an effect, so it can't be negated. His special summoning can be negated, just like Signal Red's special summoning can be negated. So if you have a card effect like Assault Mode, or some Divine Wrath or something, or Quasar, you can negate their special summons because their summoning is an effect. So you can stop them with those types of cards, and in Battle Fader's case, it won't negate the battle phase. But other than that, skill drain, shadow-imprisoning, stuff like that, breakthrough skill, shit like that won't work, because that's a condition, not an effect. YUGIOH, sending all monsters in your graveyard back to your hand to summon them, is a cause, condition of the summoning, not an effect, so you can't negate it. You can negate. You can stop. You can warning him, but you won't stop the monsters going back into the deck, which is the only real reason you're playing them, is to recycle your monsters. And he's a level 10, 2 of them on the field. You can make a Gustav max. Of course, this helps you recycle your extra deck, especially if you play one copy of certain cards that you normally would play multiple copies of, but you might not have space in your extra deck, for example, for multiple copies, so you opt for one copy, and then with YUGIOH, you can play them more than once, potentially up to 3 more times. He's good for tribute fodder, same as Battle Fader and Signal Red, as long as they still in the field. You can use them for tribute fodder, synchro, exceed summoning, all that good stuff. A 1-star tuner and YUGIOH can make a Star Eater, so that's always good, right? After YUGIOH summons onto the field, when he leaves the field, he's removed from play. Same goes for Battle Fader. When he leaves the field, he's removed from play, unless that part of the effect is negated, like skill drain or shadow-imprisoning, or using them as XYZ materials. That will negate that whole part of the effect, where they'll be banished, and then they'll go to graveyard instead. And then you can use YUGIOH like a second copy, and then recycle them all over again. So it could be an infinite loop played right. Soul Charge. Not much to say. It's an overpowered monster born, basically, right? You can do a lot of synchro plays, XYZ plays, whatever you want. Or you could just reuse a monster over and over again. Or you could set up a defense. It's just good in general, so obviously it gets splashed in a lot of decks. Spell Shattering Arrow. This is mainly for pendulum, pendulum monsters, you know, when they put them in pendulum scales. This is to disrupt and to destroy the scale system, so that way they can't just keep dropping pendulum monsters on you, or just monsters in general over and over again. And this deals damage. This also has use outside of using it against pendulum. Obviously you can use this on against Madolches or Fire Fist or Crystal Beast or any deck that uses a lot of, you know, that will have a lot of face-up spell cards on their side of the field. You can use this to get rid of them and deal damage at the same time, which is always good. This card, you know, might seem like it could be a dead draw against some people who might not play a lot of spells to stay face-up on the field for too long. They might play stuff like Duality, Soul Charge, Upstart, MST, and that's about it. Well, that's okay, because you can chain this to the activation of those cards, destroy those cards, deal 500 damage to your opponent. And that's better than nothing. So at least it's still useful, because dealing damage is better than nothing, especially if your opponent chains 2 cards. Let's say your opponent like plays Soul Charge and changes a double Cyclone. So he plays Soul Charge, he changes double Cyclone, right? And then you'll chain to those 2 cards being activated with Spell Shattering Arrow, destroying their double Cyclone and there's Soul Charge, and dealing 1,000 damage. So now when he resolves Soul Charge's effect, he can only summon but so many monsters, and then he loses life because of how many he summoned. So he's probably not going to summon that many, because you just made him lose 2,000 life points. You know what I mean? But just make him lose 500 can disrupt the play, or at least just make it where if he has only 2,000 life points, for example, pays 1,000, bring back a monster, you chain Spell Shattering Arrow to this card, popping it, dealing him 500. He only had 500 left. You know what I mean? So he can, you know, he'll be easier to beat afterwards. MST, of course, helps you get rid of back row. It's generic until they come up with something different, like a MST that banishes or bounces the card from the field to the owner's hands or back into the deck or something like that. You know, MST would just be MST, right? It does what it does it well, and it's been doing it for years, right? But as you can see, this list doesn't have Bait Doll, because essentially I replaced Bait Doll with Spell Shattering Arrow, essentially. But but technically, it's the roles reverse. I push Spell Shattering Arrow to replace MST, and MST replacing Bait Doll. That's what really happened, because MST now, its role is to destroy face down cards. It can still do face up, of course, but it's mainly to destroy face down, while Spell Shattering Arrow deals with face up spell cards. So the roles reverse, because Bait Doll used to be for face down cards and MST was for face up. And just in case you don't know what Bait Doll looks like, which you should, it'd be weird if you don't, but if you don't, that's what it looks like. That's the card I'm speaking of. So the roles reverse, so that's what's going on there. And Fairy Wind helps with continuous trap cards that Spell Shadow can't get rid of. Also, this works against pendulum monsters as well. If your opponent has like Vanity's Emptiness, Shadow-Imprisoning, Microcosmos all up on the field at the same time, one MST is not going to cut it. Spell Shadow is definitely not going to do anything against those three traps, but Fairy Wind would. Yeah, I mean, Wind Blast is a good card, but it still only does one card, while Fairy Wind can do multiple cards. So this would be good against pendulums. Of course, it deals burn damage, and it will also get rid of multiple face-up spells and traps on the field. This could also help you get rid of cards you might want to get rid of, like your Skill Drain, Red Screen, or any other, maybe even a Call to Haunted that's just taking up space. You can get rid of it and use it to burn your opponent. So it's like, can't go wrong with that. So many good reasons why this is a good card to play, right? So let's move on. Wing Blast. This replaced Raigeki Break, but there's a lot of monsters and spells and traps that can't be destroyed by card effects. So this is a good option to deal with them, because you could just not destroy them, obviously, because this effect doesn't destroy. And also, this can, if played right, can really mess up your opponent's plays. It could also mess up his ability to to get good draws. If played right, you could also permanently get rid of the card. So like, let's say your opponent plays like Reinforcement or Army, and they have a big monster on the field, then right there would be a good time to play Wing Blast, send that monster on top of their deck, and then their Reinforcement will resolve. They'll search their deck, they get their level 4 Lower Warrior, and then they shuffle the deck. Now you just essentially shuffled their monster back into the deck, as opposed to like Raigeki Break, which would have sent it to the graveyard, and they probably just would have brought it right back. You know what I mean? Stuff like that. What else? Let's say your opponent summons JD. Let's say your opponent already has a Light Sworn on the field, for example. He summons JD, you chain Wing Blast, throw JD on top of the deck. Right? And then now, let's say they attack you with their Light Sworn monster, not a big deal. So in the end phase, now the Light Sworn monster is going to mill the JD on top of the deck to the graveyard, you know what I mean? Things like that. It's like, so much you can do with it. Alright, continuing on. Oh yeah, if a card that I like to substitute in certain cases or play along with Wing Blast is Wind Art. Spiritual Wind Art, Miyabi. Because if I'm using a wind attribute deck, like let's say make a Phantom Beast with the wind type tokens and stuff like that, I can tribute the tokens for this card effect and get the effect off, so I don't have to discard a card from my hand. So this is a good card in that instance. Again, sometimes I like to combine them in the same deck to maximize the ability of just throwing stuff back into my opponent's deck, which can just mess up his consistency. Obviously he'll have cards but going back in his deck, so his deck won't get thinner. A lot of decks thin out real fast, so throwing stuff back into the decks is a good countermeasure towards deck thinning decks like Burning Abyss and stuff like that. Just throw everything back into the deck, right? Red Screen, defensive. That's all it's for, just defense. You can attack your opponent's monsters, cannot attack, and you lose 1,000 during your end phases. If you have Red Dragon Archery on your side of the field, you can send this card to the graveyard to special summon that 1-star tuner from your graveyard onto the field. So it's a really good card. And if played right, you can go into a next, synchro play for Red Dragon, then send this to graveyard, bring back the tuner, synchro, and go into a 9-star synchro. You know what I mean? So it has versatility to it, but mainly it'll defend you, which is the main use for it. Call a Haunted, that's your special summon monsters, so you can, from your graveyard and reuse them over and over again. Not much to say about that. But in certain decks where I don't want to use Call a Haunted, or call on just too slow for the deck, I use Soul Charge in its place, or I combine Call Haunted and Soul Charge in some decks, obviously. Skill Drain shuts down a lot of decks, so this is a good deck card to have main decked, you know, if you can make it work in your deck, of course. Against a lot of decks, it's stronger than a lot of people like using Breakthrough Skill, Veiler, and Vanity's Phoenix Chain, and that's cool, you know, to each their own. But I prefer Skill Drain. It lasts longer. It, you know, it works against multiple monsters. But eventually, you know, I'm thinking of swapping out into Shadow-Imprisoning Mirror. We'll see what happens, because a lot of dark support's coming out, so main deck and Shadow-Imprisoning will more likely be the thing to do. One, I don't pay 1,000 to activate this card, so this card will be free of charge. It not only blankets the field, also blankets the graveyard, so that gives me a lot more power than what Skill Drain can offer by itself. Skill Drain pretty much only blankets the field, and it costs 1,000 to use it. But you know, we'll see what the future holds. Foolish Burial, a lot of decks just coming out have effects where if the monster is sent to a graveyard by a card effect, or just sent to a graveyard period, you get some effects. So you can use Foolish Burial to send like Shadow Beast, and it becomes an upstart. You use Foolish Burial to send Shadow Dragon, it essentially becomes an MST, you know what I mean? And so forth and so forth. You send Burning Abyss Skarm to the graveyard with this card, with Foolish Burial. It basically becomes a Rhoda for tour guide, you know what I mean? So it has some uses. So I always put it in the number one, in the one of slot. But in decks where I don't need that effect, Ghost Sarko comes in handy, especially if I need to search out certain key cards. So I use that instead. Or if the deck is I don't need key cards because the whole entire deck has a lot of synergy, and I don't need to send anything to the graveyard. So I don't really need much of anything in that one of slot, so I just throw in a Lower Darkness, you know, just for extra draws, just because there's space for it. Bezel, King of Dark Dragons. If I have Dark Tuners, I prefer to use Belzy, King of Dark Dragons over Colossal Fighter. So Colossal Fighter is generic, so he fits in pretty much every deck that can synchro, so that's why I use him mainly. But if I have Dark Tuners, I swap him out and use Belzy, King of the Dark Dragons instead, because Colossal Fighter mainly is for defensive purposes with a little bit of offense, and Belzy, King of Dark Dragons can be offensive and defensive, so, and is a lot better at being offensive and defensive, so I prefer to use it. Granted, Colossal Fighter does work under Skill Drain, while Belzy, King of the Dark Dragons does not. And Shadow-Imprisoning can also negate its effect, but it could also do the same thing to Colossal Fighter, right? It doesn't matter either way. But the point is I would prefer Belzy, King of Dark Dragons over Colossal Fighter, because typically in order to get over Colossal Fighter, typically my opponent uses destruction effects like a Dark Hole or something to get rid of Colossal Fighter, which is a good way of baiting out the Dark Hole anyway. You want him to use it early on in the game, so like if you go first turn synchro, Colossal Fighter is always a good choice, because if the opponent has the Dark Hole, they're going to use it, because they can't get over him, you know, they can't just attack and beat him, so they have to use a card effect to get rid of him. So Dark Hole tends to be that option. But with Belzy, can't be destroyed by battle by card effect, so your opponent will just be sitting with cards in his hand he really can't use, right? And then Belzy can get stronger, so that's really strong, so that is very useful. When you take battle damage or effect damage, he gets stronger. and he keeps that power boost. Let's see, like I said before, Magic Planner, because I do use Skill Drain, Red Screen, Call to Haunt, that I use, continuous traps of that nature, that, one Red Screen and Skill Drain cost me some life points, so after a while I might need to get rid of them, so Magic Planner would be a pretty good option. One, I get to draw 2 cards off of it, of course, and I get rid of Skill Drain if need be, so I can use my monsters effects. So that's not a bad idea to be able to fit this in. But typically, my problem is not drawing, it's my opponent's cards, aka their back row. So Double Cyclone would be a more better choice, especially it would replace MST in certain instances where I might I tend to have a lot of these continuous traps on the field a lot longer than I would like them to in certain scenarios, so it would make more sense for me to play Double Cyclone instead of MST, so that way I can get rid of these cards, essentially shut them off, get rid of my opponent's back row, and be able to go off and use all my own effects. So those are some options I already mentioned about shadow-imprisoning. Alright, so Slacker Magician, really awesome, defensive, rank 1, 2100 defense, once per turn can't be destroyed by battle. During either player's turn, when a card or an effect is activated that targets this face-up card, you can detach material from this card, negate the activation, and destroy that card. That's always good. I typically make Slacker Magician with Battle Faders, since Battle Faders is almost every one of my decks. She's pretty much in every one of my extra decks. You get a special Battle Fader to survive a turn. Summon my second copy of Battle Fader, overlay, and go into Slacker Magician. And she helps me stall a little bit longer. And she also will cause the Battle Fader that already special summon to go to the graveyard if she gets sent to the graveyard defeated, as opposed to being removed from play. And then if I play YUGIOH, the Battle Faders will just go back in my deck for later for me to draw them and use them over and over again, right? Same as Slacker will go into my extra deck, so that way it's just an infinite cycle, right? Wind Up Zen Mains, 2100 defense. It's essentially Regeki Break, If it would be destroyed by battle by a card effect, detach a material during the end phase in which that effect was activated. Destroy 1 card on the field. So since I have Zen Main, I don't necessarily need Regeki Break in the deck. I could use something like Wing Blast, but if I ever need the effect of Regeki Break, so to speak, Wind Up Zen Main is a good option. Plus he's fire, so he comes in handy in certain decks. Number 101, Silent Honor Arc. This replaced Maestro Vision because of the whole, if it would be destroyed by battle card effect, you can detach a material instead, and it won't be. But also it has an ability where you can detach 2 materials from this card and take 1 face-up special summon monster your opponent controls and attach it as material. It's 2100, so it's definitely capable of being offensive as well as being defensive. Exiton, just a rank 4 black rolls. That's all it is. So Sky Blaster Castel. He also replaced Maestro in abilities and whatnot, because he has 2000 attack. You can detach 1 material to put 1 face-up monster in your opponent's side field face down, so it will make it easier to run most monsters over. Stroke has trouble running over certain monsters, so Wing Sky Blaster Castle can do what Stroke can't do in that instance, but typically you could just use the secondary effect, attach 2 materials, target 1 face-up card on the field, and send it back into the owner's deck. So it's definitely much better than Stroke. So this is definitely a great option, and also can deal with spells and traps You can use this to get rid of stuff like like shadow-imprisoning, light-imprisoning, anything similar to that, a red screen, a call to home, to the safe zone, whatever, field spell, whatever is problematic, you can get rid of it. Typically you use it on a monster. YUGIOH max, you use 2 exotics to create it. Or need 2 level 10 monsters, of course. Detach material, deal 2,000 points of damage to your opponent. So that makes him a lot more powerful than Gaga Cowboy, right? Plus he has a 3,000 attacker and defense, so you can attack the turn you activate that effect. So that makes it really devastating, because you can essentially deal 5,000 damage in 1 turn. So it makes him awesome. Black Rose Dragon, obviously destroy everything on the field. It's fire, it's useful, it's a dragon, it can be used in Dragon Ruler decks, among other things. Alive Justice Light Gazer, it's just for when you're going up against light decks. It could be really, really strong under the right conditions, because if your opponent has 5 monsters and 5 light monsters in his graveyard, you'll gain 1,000 power, so you'll be 34. That's pretty decent. If your opponent has 10 light monsters, you'll be 4,400. Can't argue with them results. And if your opponent has like 40 40 monsters in the graveyard, you're essentially gaining what, 5 thousands, 2,000, 2,000, 2,000, like what, 8,000. So technically, you know, just 30 monsters, right, would be anyway, you could just go overkill. 30 or more monsters, you could potentially OTK opponent just with him alone. Colossal Fighter, generic defense and offense card. But if I have the option to synchro with Dark Tuners, I use Belzy, King of Dark Dragons instead, of course. Plus, Belzy is a dragon type, so that's useful in Dragon Ruler decks, while Colossal Fighter is not. Scrap Dragon, I can pop one of my cards, pop one of my opponent's cards. In some instances, I pop Scrap Dragon himself to pop something, or I summon Scrap Dragon, attack something like a monster, kill it by battle, and then main phase to pop Scrap Dragon and a card my opponent controls and get rid of it. So I can essentially get rid of 2 cards with just Scrap Dragon. I typically use Scrap Dragon to take down Abyss Guile, but I would actually prefer to use Hot Red Dragon instead, because 1, I can get rid of a lot of monsters with it, that's one thing. 2nd, I can attack in the turn I use that effect, so being able to deal 3,000 damage after getting rid of Abyss Guiles, for example, is a really, really good thing. But I currently don't have him in real life for my decks, but I will soon, so I definitely look forward to that. But for now, I do have Scrap Dragons, so they do just fine, but I would rather have a monster still in the field in the process. But if I get lucky and I have a card I can pop instead of him, of course I may choose that option. Blackwing Dragon, he's just there for the whole, you know, for burn effects, chain burns, you know what I mean? That's all he's there for. Nothing else other than that. I wouldn't play him if it wasn't for the fact that you never know. It's better to have him and not need him than to need him and not even have him. Stardust Dragon helps protect, you know, your skill drains, red screens, call hunter, whatever you want to protect. Your supply squad, your field spells, your pendulum zones, you know, pendulum monsters. Whatever you need to protect from destruction, Stardust will be there, right? Hot Red Dragon Archfiend helps you get rid of monsters that are powerful in an attack mode. You can wipe them out all at the same time and still be able to keep field presence. You know, so he's kind of like a more controllable version of Black Rose or Exoton Knight. You know what I mean? You summon them, activate his effect, get rid of the monsters, attack for 3,000. So yeah, I love that. And he's dark, which is also good, which means like Pulsar can bring him back. Same goes for Blackwing Dragon. And you can also use like Pulsar bring back Belzy, King of the Dark Dragons. So that's all types of good stuff there. Leo, the Keeper of the Sacred Tree. 3100, they can't be targeted unless it's your main phase 2. So it's great in many reasons. You know, it's great against Big Eye 101, Castiel, Zenmain, Tyrus, whatever, Adrius, Vulcasaurus, whatever. Tons of cards that target won't be able to mess with him. He's 3100, so no one's going to be able to use their BLS to remove him from play, and they definitely can't run him over with just 3,000 pound, right? Because he's 3100, don't have to worry about them lancing him, Book of Mooning him. They're going to have to use global effects, they can't use targeting effects, so he is great. So if you can make him, right? Star Eater, great monsters, something can't be negated, and cards and effects cannot be activated in response to summoning. And of course, if this card attacks, it is unaffected by other cards until the end of the damage step. And he's a 3200, so I love that. So the opponent will definitely have some tough times dealing with him. And that's the end of the video.